Wilted Hope's Eleanor Mercer stood at the window of her colonial home, watching the movers load the last of Thomas's belongings into the truck. 28 years of marriage packed away in cardboard boxes and bubble wrap. Her fingers traced the gold band she still wore, a habit she couldn't seem to break even 3 months after he'd left. "You deserve someone who can give you what you want," he'd said, not meeting her eyes. "I'm tired of waiting for something that's never going to happen." What Thomas really meant was that he deserved someone younger, someone whose body hadn't failed them both repeatedly over 2 decades of fertility treatments, miscarriages, and dashed hopes. Someone like Vanessa, the 34-year-old pharmaceutical sales rep he'd met at a conference in Phoenix last year. The moving truck pulled away and Eleanor finally removed her wedding ring, placing it in the ceramic dish on the mantel. At 52, she hadn't imagined she'd be starting over. Her colleagues at the university's botanical research department had been sympathetic, but clearly uncomfortable with her grief. "You're better off," they'd say, or, "Now you can focus on your research." As if her marriage had been a distraction, rather than the foundation of her life. Eleanor walked through the house, now echoing with emptiness despite still containing most of the furniture. Thomas had only taken what he'd brought in or purchased himself. His leather reading chair, the expensive coffee maker, the artwork from his office. He'd left behind the photographs, though. Eleanor gathered them all into a box. Their wedding day, hiking in Yosemite, Christmas parties, and the Caribbean cruise for their 25th anniversary. She sealed the box with packing tape and pushed it to the back of the hall closet. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at the university greenhouse earlier than usual. The humid air enveloped her as she moved among the specimens, checking soil moisture and examining new growth. Her research on drought-resistant food crops had always been important work, but now it was her lifeline. "I thought I'd find you here," said Diane, her department head, appearing between rows of experimental tomato plants. "You missed the faculty meeting." Eleanor checked her watch and winced. "I'm sorry, I lost track of time." Diane's eyes softened. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," Eleanor said automatically, the response she'd perfected. "Just focused on work." "That's what I wanted to talk to you about. The university is cutting funding to several research projects, and I'm afraid yours is on the list." Eleanor's hand stilled on the plant she'd been examining. "What? Why? Our results have been promising, and with climate change—" "Politics," Diane said simply. "The new board wants to redirect funds to more commercially viable projects. They're giving you 6 months to wrap things up or secure outside funding." It felt like another abandonment. First Thomas, now her research. Eleanor nodded stiffly, not trusting herself to speak. "Take some time off," Diane suggested gently. "You've accumulated months of unused vacation. Maybe a break would give you perspective." "I don't need perspective," Eleanor said. "I need to work." But the next day, standing in the greenhouse with the knowledge that even this sanctuary was temporary, Eleanor felt a weariness settle deep in her bones. On impulse, she drove to the west side of the city, where abandoned industrial buildings were giving way to gentrification. Her grandmother had lived here decades ago, in a small house with a garden that had seemed magical to Eleanor as a child. The neighborhood had changed dramatically, but as Eleanor drove slowly down a side street, she noticed a vacant lot overgrown with weeds. Through the chain-link fence, she could make out the remains of raised garden beds and a dilapidated shed. A faded sign hung from the fence. "West Side Community Garden." Eleanor parked and approached the fence. Something stirred in her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. Possibility. A woman pushing a stroller approached, a teenager walking beside her. "Excuse me," Eleanor called. "Do you know who's responsible for this garden?" The woman shrugged. "Been abandoned for years. Shame too. This neighborhood could use something beautiful." As the woman continued on, Eleanor stood at the fence, imagining what the space could become with care and attention. For the first time since Thomas had packed his bags, she felt a flicker of purpose beyond merely surviving each day. She didn't notice the young girl watching her from across the street. A baby, balanced on her hip, his tiny hand reaching toward the empty garden as if he too could see what it might become. Unexpected seedlings, Eleanor found herself returning to the abandoned community garden the next day, armed with bolt cutters and a determination she hadn't felt in months. The rusted padlock on the gate surrendered with a satisfying snap. Stepping onto the overgrown property felt like trespassing, but also like coming home. The lot was larger than it appeared from the street, nearly a quarter-acre of urban possibility. Beneath the tangle of weeds and debris, Eleanor could make out the bones of what had once been a thriving space. Raised beds constructed from cinder blocks, a small greenhouse with most of its panels missing, and a central area that might have been a gathering space. At the back, several fruit trees struggled beneath choking vines. Eleanor pulled out her phone and took pictures, already mentally cataloging the native plants that had survived and making lists of what she'd need. She didn't notice the young girl approaching until a small voice spoke behind her. "You can't just break in here, you know." Eleanor turned to find a teenager with deep brown eyes regarding her skeptically. The girl couldn't be more than 16, with her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. On her hip sat a baby boy, perhaps 7 months old, with a halo of dark curls and wide, curious eyes. "I'm not breaking in," Eleanor said, then glanced guiltily at the cut lock on the ground. "Well, technically I am, but only because I want to restore it." The girl shifted the baby to her other hip. "Why would you want to do that? Nobody cares about this place." "I care," Eleanor said simply, "and based on how you're defending it, I think you might too." Something in the girl's expression softened slightly. "I'm Zara. This is my brother Jamal. Eleanor Mercer. I teach botany at the university." Jamal reached out toward Eleanor with a chubby hand, babbling softly. Without thinking, Eleanor offered her finger, which he promptly grabbed and attempted to put in his mouth. "He likes you," Zara said, surprise evident in her voice. "He's usually shy with strangers." "I've always had a way with growing things," Eleanor replied, smiling at the baby. "Even the human variety." Zara's expression clouded slightly. "We should go. My grandmother is expecting us back." "Wait," Eleanor called as Zara turned to leave. "Do you live nearby? Do you know who owns this garden now?" 2 blocks over, and nobody owns it. The community center that started it closed down 3 years ago. Now it's just another empty lot waiting for developers. Eleanor pulled a business card from her wallet. "If you're interested in helping bring it back, or if you know others who might be, please call me. I'm here most afternoons now." Zara hesitated, then took the card and tucked it into her pocket. For the next week, Eleanor spent every afternoon at the garden. She cleared pathways, cataloged what could be salvaged, and began to draw up plans. She applied for a leave of absence from the university, which Diane granted readily, perhaps relieved that Eleanor had found something to focus on besides her failing research project and broken marriage. On the 5th day, as Eleanor was struggling to remove a particularly stubborn root ball, a shadow fell across her work. She looked up to see Zara and Jamal, accompanied by an elderly woman with silver-streaked hair and Zara's same penetrating gaze. "This is my grandmother, Mrs. Okafor," Zara said. "I told her what you're doing." Mrs. Okafor assessed Eleanor with a measured look. "My daughter helped build this garden before she passed. Zara was just a child then. Now she brings her brother here to show him what their mother created." Eleanor stood, brushing soil from her hands. "I'm sorry for your loss. Your daughter built something beautiful." "Yes," Mrs. Okafor said, "but beauty without maintenance becomes ruin." She gestured to the dilapidated greenhouse. "Like many things in this neighborhood." "Grandmother," Zara said quietly, "has been telling stories about how this garden once fed families on this block. We grew vegetables, herbs, flowers," Mrs. Okafor confirmed. "Had community dinners right there under that broken arbor. Children learned how plants grow. Elderly had purpose-tending beds they could reach from a chair." Eleanor nodded, seeing it clearly. It could be that way again. "You think one woman can bring all that back?" Mrs. Okafor asked skeptically. "Not one woman," Eleanor replied. "A community." Mrs. Okafor's expression remained impassive, but she nodded slightly. "Zara will help you today," I must take Jamal for his checkup. Actually, Zara interjected, I was hoping Miss Eleanor might watch him. The clinic always takes forever, and he gets fussy. He could nap in his stroller here in the shade. Eleanor's heart skipped. She hadn't held a baby since her last miscarriage 8 years ago. I don't know if that's... You said you were good with growing things, Zara reminded her. And he really does like you. Before Eleanor could protest further, Mrs. Okafor transferred a sleepy Jamal to her arms. His weight settled against her chest, warm and trusting, and something long frozen inside Eleanor began to thaw. 2 hours, Mrs. Okafor said firmly. We'll bring lunch when we return. As they left, Eleanor stood in the middle of the reclaimed garden holding Jamal. He yawned and nestled closer, his tiny fingers curling into her shirt. Well, she whispered to him, it seems we both have some growing to do. Jamal slept peacefully as Eleanor worked one-handed, clearing a small section near the broken greenhouse. She sang softly, old lullabies her own mother had sung, forgotten, melodies that returned naturally. When he woke, she showed him a butterfly that had landed on a surviving marigold, delighting in his wide-eyed wonder dot. By the time Zara and Mrs. Okafor returned with sandwiches and cold tea, Eleanor had fallen. Completely in love with the baby boy who watched the world with such curious eyes, they ate together on a blanket spread in a cleared corner of the garden, and for the first time since Thomas had walked out, Eleanor felt something like belonging. There was a time, Mrs. Okafor said as they finished their meal, when this garden saved our neighborhood during hard times. Perhaps now it can save something else. Eleanor met the older woman's knowing gaze. Perhaps it already has. As evening approached and they prepared to leave, Jamal reached for Eleanor, his face crumpling when Zara took him instead. We live in the blue house on Maple Street, Zara told her, if you want to visit or need more help with the garden. Eleanor watched them walk away, Jamal's little hand waving over Zara's shoulder. The garden around her was still mostly weeds and broken dreams, but now she could see clearly what it might become. What they all might become together. That night. For the first time in months, Eleanor slept without dreaming of what she had lost. Instead, she dreamed of small hands planting seeds and a garden bursting into bloom. Growing pains by mid-July, the Westside Community Garden had begun its transformation. 6 weeks of Eleanor's determined labor, along with weekend help from Zara and occasionally other neighborhood residents, had cleared away years of neglect. The raised beds now stood rebuilt with salvaged lumber, filled with rich soil donated by a local landscaper who'd seen Eleanor's flyers at the corner market. Eleanor wiped sweat from her brow as she finished planting a row of pepper seedlings. The summer heat pressed down on the city like a heavy blanket, but she hardly noticed anymore. Her skin had bronzed from daily work in the sun, and muscles long unused had strengthened from digging, lifting, and building. Miss Eleanor. Jamal's excited voice carried across the garden. At 8 months old, he was more vocal every day, though his vocabulary consisted mostly of enthusiastic babbling and a few recognizable sounds. Eleanor had become fluent in his particular language. Zara pushed his stroller through the new gravel pathway that wound between the garden beds. Sorry we're late. Grandmother wasn't feeling well this morning. Eleanor immediately straightened. Is she okay? Does she need anything? Just her heart medicine acting up. She's resting now. Zara lifted Jamal from his stroller and set him on. A colorful quilt spread beneath the newly repaired pergola. But that's why I wanted to talk to you. Eleanor settled beside them, offering Jamal a wooden spoon he immediately began using to tap the ground. What's going on? Zara tucked her hair behind her ear, a nervous gesture Eleanor had come to recognize. I got a job interview, at the mall. It's just part-time, but with grandmother's medical bills. She trailed off, looking at Jamal. That's wonderful, Eleanor said, though she sensed Zara's concern. But you're worried about childcare? Zara nodded. Grandmother can't watch him all day anymore, and the waiting list for subsidized daycare is 2 years long. Eleanor's heart quickened. I could watch him while you work. That's a lot to ask. It's not asking if I'm offering, Eleanor replied. Besides, he could be my garden assistant. She tickled Jamal's round belly, delighting in his squealing laugh. The arrangement started the following week. While Zara worked afternoons and weekends at a clothing store in the mall, Eleanor cared for Jamal. She installed a small sandbox in a shady corner of the garden where he could play while she worked. She taught him to pat soil gently around seedlings, his tiny hands mimicking her movements with surprising care. The garden flourished under their attention, and so did Jamal. Eleanor marveled at his daily changes, the way he pulled himself up, on the edge of a planter, his first wobbly steps holding her fingers, the expanding collection of sounds that were becoming words. Ela, he called her, unable to manage her full name. It became his word for everything good and exciting. Butterflies visiting the zinnias, the spray of water from the hose on hot days, the first tiny tomato turning red. One warm Tuesday afternoon, as Eleanor was showing Jamal how to identify which cherry tomatoes were ready to pick, a familiar voice froze her in place. Ellie? Is that you? Thomas stood at the garden gate, looking as out of place in his pressed business casual as a peacock among sparrows. Beside him stood a petite blonde woman whose sundress did little to conceal her very pregnant belly. Eleanor instinctively gathered Jamal into her arms, as if shielding him from an approaching storm. Thomas, this is a surprise. He stepped into the garden, the blonde woman following hesitantly. Diane told me you were working on some community project. I was in the neighborhood for a client meeting. His eyes fixed on Jamal, confusion evident. I didn't know you were babysitting? The word felt like a diminishment of everything she'd built these past weeks. This is Jamal, Eleanor said simply, not bothering to explain further. What do you want, Thomas? He glanced at the woman beside him. This is Vanessa. We're expecting in October, as if Eleanor couldn't see that for herself. We're getting married next month. Eleanor felt a familiar pain twist in her chest, but it was duller now, more distant. Congratulations. Thomas's eyes swept over the garden, taking in the neat rows of vegetables, the flowering vines beginning to climb trellises, the colorful mural that now brightened the storage shed wall, a project led by teenagers from the local high school. You've done amazing work here, he said, sounding genuinely impressed. It reminds me of that community garden your grandmother had when we first met. Of course he would remember that. It was where he had proposed to her, kneeling among the rosemary and lavender, promising a lifetime of growth together. Actually, Vanessa spoke up, her voice higher than Eleanor had expected. We wanted to invite you to the wedding. I know it's unconventional, but Thomas speaks so highly of you, and after 28 years it didn't seem right to just... I won't be attending, Eleanor interrupted, surprising herself with her firmness. Jamal squirmed in her arms, sensing the tension, and she bounced him gently. But I appreciate the gesture. Thomas's expression tightened. Still bitter, then? Eleanor looked at her ex-husband, really looked at him for the first time since he'd appeared. His hair had more gray. Then she remembered, and new lines framed his mouth. He seemed smaller somehow, less substantial than the man who had occupied so much of her heart for nearly 3 decades. Not bitter, Thomas. Just busy growing something new. As if on cue, Zara appeared at the garden gate, still in her work uniform. Sorry I'm late, Miss Eleanor. My manager asked me to stay. She stopped, taking in the scene. It's fine, Zara, Eleanor assured her. Thomas and Vanessa were just leaving. She handed Jamal to his sister, her heart warming as he immediately reached back toward her with a plaintive, Ella. Thomas watched the exchange, something unreadable crossing his face. You always wanted this, he said quietly. A child. What I wanted was to nurture life, Eleanor corrected him. And now I am, in more ways than I ever imagined. After Thomas and Vanessa left, Zara helped Eleanor harvest vegetables for the garden's first community distribution, scheduled for the weekend. They worked in comfortable silence until Zara finally asked, Was that your ex-husband? Yes. And the woman having his baby? Eleanor nodded. Zara arranged bell peppers in a harvest basket. Did it hurt, seeing them? Less than I expected, Eleanor admitted. A few months ago, it would have destroyed me. But now, she gestured to the thriving garden, to Jamal playing with a toy truck in his sandbox. I have this. Later that evening, as Eleanor drove home alone to her still too empty house, she allowed herself to acknowledge the truth beneath her brave words. Yes, it had hurt seeing Thomas with his new life growing inside Vanessa. Yes, there was still a hollow space inside her that ached for what might have been Dot. But that space was smaller now, partially filled by the garden and by Jamal's sweet face lighting up when she arrived each morning. By Zara's growing confidence as Eleanor taught her about plants and encouraged her to enroll in the community college's early childhood program. By Mrs. Okafor's grudging approval as the garden began to fulfill its original purpose of feeding and gathering the community. As Eleanor pulled into her driveway, her phone chimed with a text from Zara. A photo of Jamal sleeping, clutching the stuffed carrot toy Eleanor had given him, captioned simply, "Missing his Ela already." Eleanor smiled, through sudden tears. The garden was teaching her what she had forgotten during those years of failed fertility treatments and dashed hopes. That there were many ways to bring life into the world, and many kinds of families waiting to bloom. Frost warning. The first hint of autumn touched the garden in late September. Eleanor noticed it in the slant of afternoon light, the slight chill that settled after sundown, and the changing colors of the maple tree that cast dappled shade over the children's area. The summer crops were finishing their production, making way for cool weather plantings of kale, spinach, and root vegetables. "Higher, Ela! Higher!" Jamal demanded, his little legs kicking excitedly as Eleanor pushed him on the tire swing she'd installed beside the sandbox. At 10 months old, his vocabulary expanded daily, though Ela remained his favorite word. "Any higher and you'll fly away like a bird," Eleanor laughed, giving him another gentle push. The garden had become a neighborhood fixture over the past 3 months. Weekend workshops drew residents from surrounding blocks to learn about urban gardening. A retired chef taught cooking classes using the garden's harvest. Eleanor had secured a small grant from the university's community outreach program, enough to repair the greenhouse and install a rainwater collection system. But the true heart of the garden was the small playgroup that met on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, where Eleanor taught young children and their caregivers about plants, while Jamal helped as her assistant. Watching the toddlers wonder at sprouting seeds and butterfly visits healed something in Eleanor that she'd thought permanently broken. She glanced at her watch, surprised at the time. "Zara's late," she murmured, lifting Jamal from the swing. "Let's get you a snack while we wait." They were sharing apple slices in the shade when Zara finally arrived, still wearing her community college lanyard. Her expression was troubled, her movements agitated as she dropped her backpack on the ground. "Sorry I'm late, I had to meet with my academic advisor." She scooped up Jamal, hugging him tightly, then set him down again with his toys. Eleanor studied her. "Is everything okay?" Zara paced the length of the small sitting area. "I got offered a scholarship." "That's wonderful," Eleanor exclaimed, but her enthusiasm faltered at Zara's continued distress. "Isn't it? It's for the spring semester, full tuition, books, even a housing stipend." Zara's voice caught. "At Westridge College." Eleanor's heart sank. Westridge was a prestigious private college, and nearly 300 miles away. "Oh, I can't take it," Zara said firmly, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I can't leave Jamal, or grandmother. They need me here." Eleanor took a deep breath, pushing aside her immediate selfish reaction, that she couldn't bear to lose either of them. "Zara, this is an incredible opportunity. There must be a way to make it work." "How?" Zara demanded. "Grandmother can barely manage her own care now, let alone a baby. I'd have to take him with me, but there's a 2-year waiting list for the campus childcare center." "What about—" Eleanor hesitated, heart racing. "What if Jamal stayed with me?" Zara stilled. "What do you mean?" I could be his guardian while you're at school, Eleanor said, the idea taking shape as she spoke. You'd come home on breaks and weekends whenever possible. We'd video chat every day. And when you graduate, you'd be in a position to provide so much more for both of you. Zara stared at her. You'd do that? Take care of him for 2 years? In a heartbeat, Eleanor answered truthfully. I love him, Zara, and I believe in you. Your mother helped build this garden to nurture this community. Let me help nurture her children. That evening, Eleanor sat alone on her patio, nursing a glass of wine as she considered the magnitude of what she'd offered. Could she really become a full-time guardian to Jamal? Her house had plenty of space. The room intended as a nursery still sat empty after all these years. But there would be so much to arrange. Childcare during her teaching hours, pediatrician visits, the 100 daily needs of a growing child. And what if Zara changed her mind after a semester away? What if Eleanor formed an even deeper bond with Jamal only to lose him? Could her heart survive another loss? Her phone rang, Thomas's name flashing on the screen. With a sigh, she answered. Ellie, I've been thinking about you since we stopped by the garden, he said without preamble. Are you really okay? I'm fine, Thomas. It's just you seemed different and that baby. For a minute I thought he trailed off. You thought he was mine, Eleanor supplied, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. That I'd somehow managed to have the child you always resented me for not providing. A heavy silence followed. I never resented you, Thomas finally said. I resented our situation. A situation you escaped the minute a better option presented itself. That's not fair. Isn't it? Eleanor took a steadying breath. Why are you calling, Thomas? He hesitated. Vanessa's having complications with the pregnancy, preeclampsia. The doctors are monitoring it, but it's scary. I found myself thinking about what you went through, all those years of trying, how strong you were. Eleanor closed her eyes, memories of hospital rooms and sympathetic doctors flooding back. I'm sorry to hear that. I hope everything turns out well for you both. Ellie, I know I don't deserve your kindness, but could we have coffee sometime? Talk things through properly? I need to make peace with how things ended. Eleanor considered. This surprised to find that she felt no pull toward closure with Thomas. I don't think that's a good idea right now. I'm in the middle of some big decisions. About the garden? About my life. She ended the call shortly after, promising to think about his request, but knowing she wouldn't quote the next morning. Eleanor arrived at Mrs. Okafor's house carrying pastries and coffee. The older woman had requested this meeting, and Eleanor suspected it concerned Zara's scholarship opportunity. Mrs. Okafor opened the door before Eleanor could knock, ushering her into a small, immaculately kept living room where Jamal played, on a colorful mat. He squealed with delight when he saw Eleanor crawling rapidly toward her. He has been watching the window since dawn, Mrs. Okafor observed dryly, somehow knowing you would come. Eleanor scooped him up, breathing in his sweet baby scent. Good morning to you too, little gardener. They settled at the kitchen table, Jamal happily perched on Eleanor's lap. Mrs. Okafor poured the coffee Eleanor had brought, added a generous amount of cream to hers, and got straight to the point. Zara tells me you offered to take Jamal while she attends this college. Eleanor nodded. If you approve, of course. Why would you do this? Mrs. Okafor asked bluntly. You are not family. The question stung, but Eleanor understood its necessity. Because I care about both of them. Because Zara deserves this opportunity, and Jamal deserves a stable home while she pursues it. Mrs. Okafor studied her over the rim of her coffee cup. And when Zara finishes school, when she takes him back, what will you do then? It was the question Eleanor had been avoiding, the one that kept her awake at night. I'll let him go, she said softly. Loving someone means wanting what's best for them, even when it breaks your heart. Mrs. Okafor's stern expression softened, slightly. You speak from experience. Yes, Eleanor admitted. I do. My daughter would have liked you, Mrs. Okafor said unexpectedly. Practical, stubborn, good with growing things. She reached across the table and placed a weathered hand over Eleanor's. If you take my great-grandson into your home, you become family, you understand? Not babysitter, not temporary guardian, family. Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. I understand. Good. Then we must discuss details. Zara leaves in January, much to arrange before then. As they talked logistics, how often Zara would visit, what routines Jamal needed maintained, the legal paperwork required, Eleanor felt a weight lifting. The future that had seemed so barren just months ago now stretched before her, filled with possibilities. Later, as she and Jamal worked in the garden together, showing a group of neighborhood children how to harvest the last of the season's tomatoes, Eleanor thought about Mrs. Okafor's words. Family. A concept she'd once defined so narrowly. A husband, biological children, a traditional structure. Now she saw it differently. A web of connections, chosen and cultivated like the plants around her. That evening, a sudden cold front moved in, threatening the garden with the first frost of the season. Eleanor received weather alerts on her phone and rushed back to the garden at dusk, working by lantern light to cover tender plants with sheets and frostcloth. As she worked, she thought about how life, like gardening, required constant adaptation, protection during cold spells, pruning when necessary, and always making room for new growth. Full bloom. The February morning dawned crisp and clear as Eleanor fastened Jamal into his car seat, double-checking the straps with the careful attention she now applied to everything in her role as his guardian. Ready to go see the garden? Sweet pea, she asked, brushing a kiss against his forehead. Garden. Jamal clapped his hands, now a robust 13-month-old with a vocabulary that expanded daily. His dark curls had grown into a wild halo that bounced when he nodded enthusiastically. The past month had been a whirlwind of adjustment. Zara had left for Westridge College 3 weeks ago, after spending winter break helping Jamal settle into Eleanor's home. The first few nights after Zara's departure had been difficult, Jamal crying for his sister, Eleanor questioning her ability to provide the comfort he needed. But they had weathered that storm together, finding their own rhythm in this new arrangement. Eleanor drove carefully through the quiet Sunday streets. The community garden had entered its winter rest, but there was still work to be done preparing for spring. More importantly, today marked the official groundbreaking ceremony for the garden's expansion. With funding secured through a combination of grants Eleanor had written and donations from local businesses, they were adding an educational pavilion, wheelchair-accessible pathways, and a commercial kitchen for community cooking classes. When Eleanor pulled into the small gravel parking area beside the garden, she was surprised to see a dozen cars already there, despite the early hour. Looks like we have company, she told Jamal as she unbuckled him and set him on his feet, holding his mittened hand. They walked through the garden gate to find a flurry of activity. Mrs. Okafor was directing a group of volunteers setting up folding chairs in the central gathering space. Several neighborhood teenagers were hanging colorful banners between posts. Near the greenhouse, a tall man with salt and pepper hair was examining the architectural plans spread across a portable table. Miss Eleanor, called one of the teens, waving excitedly. We got here early to surprise you. I see that, Eleanor laughed, overwhelmed by the show of support. Jamal tugged at her hand, eager to explore his beloved garden even in its winter dormancy. Mrs. Okafor approached, her stern expression softened by a rare smile. I brought extra thermoses of hot chocolate. The news station will be here at 9. News station? Eleanor echoed, suddenly nervous. Local feature on community revitalization, Mrs. Okafor explained. Good publicity for fundraising. The man with the architectural plans looked up, catching Eleanor's eye. He set down his pencil and walked over, extending his hand. You must be Eleanor. I'm Marcus Hamilton, the contractor for the pavilion. The Community Foundation spoke highly of you. Eleanor shook his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of hands-on work, despite his professional attire. It's nice to finally meet you in person. Your design suggestions were brilliant. Just practical adaptations, he said modestly. 30 years of building teaches you what works and what doesn't. Jamal tugged insistently at Eleanor's coat, pointing toward the children's area where the tire swing moved gently in the winter. Breeze. Swing, Ella. Swing. This must be the young man I've heard so much about, Marcus said, crouching to Jamal's level. I'm Mr. Marcus. I hear you're a master gardener. Jamal regarded him solemnly before breaking into a dimpled smile. I grow carrots. Impressive, Marcus nodded seriously. Carrots are tricky. Maybe you could give me some pointers sometime. Eleanor felt an unexpected warmth watching their interaction. Jamal, why don't we show Mr. Marcus the new children's garden area? He'll be building the special reading nook we designed. As they walked through the garden together, Eleanor was struck by how naturally Marcus engaged with Jamal, asking questions about his favorite plants and listening attentively to his toddler explanations. When they reached the designated children's section, Marcus pulled a small notebook from his pocket and sketched a quick design. What do you think about adding a small bridge here? He asked Jamal. Kids love bridges. Jamal's eyes widened with excitement. Yes, bridge. Marcus glanced at Eleanor. If that works with your vision, of course. The vision is evolving, she replied with a smile. That's the beauty of gardens. They're never really finished. By 9 o'clock, the garden was filled, with community members bundled against the winter chill. The local news crew set up near the newly marked foundation for the pavilion. Eleanor stood nervously before the gathered crowd, Jamal perched on her hip. 6 months ago, this was an abandoned lot, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Today, it's the heart of our community again. None of this would have been possible without all of you contributing your time, energy, and belief in what we could create together. She acknowledged the key volunteers, the donors, the neighborhood council that had helped navigate permits. As she spoke, she felt Jamal grow heavy against her shoulder, his excitement giving way to the mourning. Nap he still needed. Marcus appeared silently at her side. May I? He whispered, gesturing to take Jamal. Eleanor hesitated only briefly before transferring the drowsy toddler. To her amazement, Jamal settled comfortably against Marcus's broad shoulder, eyes drooping. The next phase of the West Side Community Garden begins today, Eleanor continued, feeling strangely unburdened. With the new pavilion, accessible pathways, and teaching kitchen, we'll be able to serve more families, host educational programs, and ensure that no one in our community goes hungry for either food or connection. The ceremonial groundbreaking followed with Eleanor, Mrs. Okafor, and the neighborhood council president turning the first shovelfuls of soil for the pavilion foundation. The news crew filmed as Eleanor explained the garden's history and vision, making sure to credit Zara's mother as one of the original founders. As the formal ceremony concluded and people broke into smaller work groups, Eleanor found herself standing with Marcus, who still held a sleeping Jamal. You're good with him, she observed. I raised my daughter alone after my wife passed, he explained quietly. She's in college now. I miss having little ones around. Before Eleanor could respond, her phone chimed with an incoming video call. From Zara. She answered quickly, angling the screen to capture both her and Jamal. How's my baby brother? Zara asked, her face filling the screen from her dorm room 300 miles away. Sleeping through his big television debut? Eleanor laughed, turning the phone so Zara could see Jamal nestled against Marcus. How are your classes going? Challenging, but good, Zara replied. My psychology professor says I have a natural talent for understanding developmental stages. I'm thinking about specializing in early childhood education. You'd be wonderful at that, Eleanor said warmly. The children's garden misses your creative input. I'll be home for spring break in 3 weeks, Zara reminded her. I've been collecting ideas from the campus gardens here. After promising to call again that evening for Jamal's bedtime routine, Zara ended the call. Eleanor turned to find Marcus watching her with quiet admiration. "You've created something remarkable here," he said, gesturing to the bustling activity around them. "Both in this garden and in your relationship with Zara and Jamal." "It wasn't what I planned," Eleanor admitted, thinking of how drastically her life had changed in 6 months. "But then, the best gardens often grow from unexpected seeds." As the morning progressed, Eleanor found herself working alongside Marcus, clearing ground for the pavilion's foundation. Their conversation flowed easily, touching on their shared love of creating spaces where things could grow and flourish. When he mentioned being a widower for 8 years, she felt comfortable enough to tell him about Thomas, the years of infertility, and her eventual reinvention. "Life rarely follows our careful plans," Marcus observed, helping her roll a large stone from the construction area. "My wife and I had just started discussing having a second child when her cancer was diagnosed. After she died, I thought that chapter of my life was closed forever." "And now?" Eleanor asked, surprising herself with her directness. Marcus smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Now I'm standing in a winter garden, helping build something new, talking to a remarkable woman who reminds me that growth is always possible." By early afternoon, Jamal had awakened from his nap and was helping Eleanor and Marcus mark the pavilion boundaries with stakes and string. Mrs. Okafor watched from a bench, nodding approvingly as the three of them worked together. "You make good team," she commented when Eleanor brought her a cup of hot chocolate. "The carpenter sees you clearly." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm, and not from the February chill. "We've just met, Edith." "My husband and I knew in one day," Mrs. Okafor replied matter-of-factly. "Sometimes heart recognizes what belongs to it without lengthy introductions." As the winter sun began its early descent, the volunteers gradually dispersed, leaving promises to return for next weekend's workday. Eleanor found herself reluctant for the day to end, even as Jamal began showing signs of tiredness, rubbing his eyes and growing clingy. "I should get him home for dinner," she told Marcus as they gathered, the last of the tools. "Would you mind if I called you sometime?" he asked, his direct gaze making it clear he meant more than garden business. "Perhaps we could have dinner once the pavilion foundation is poured next week. I know a great place with high chairs." Eleanor smiled, a flutter of anticipation warming her chest. "I'd like that." That evening, after Jamal's bath and bedtime story, Eleanor sat in the rocking chair beside his crib, watching him sleep. The nursery, so long empty and waiting, now burst with life. Colorful books on shelves, toys in baskets, tiny clothes in the dresser. Photos of Zara adorned the walls, along with pressed flowers from the garden and the growth chart where Eleanor meticulously marked Jamal's progress. Her phone lit up with a text from Zara. How was the groundbreaking? Did Jamal behave for the cameras? Eleanor sent back the photos she'd taken, including one that a volunteer had captured of Eleanor, Marcus, and Jamal examining a winter-dormant butterfly bush together. They looked, Eleanor realized with a start, like a family. "Who's that with you and Jay?" Zara texted back immediately. "Marcus, the contractor building the pavilion," Eleanor replied, then hesitated before adding, "He invited us to dinner next week." The typing bubbles appeared and disappeared several times before Zara's response came through. "Good. You deserve someone who sees how amazing you are. Both of you do." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness or loss, but of overwhelming gratitude for the unexpected turns her life had taken. She thought of the garden in spring, imagining the new pavilion filled with learners, the expanded beds bursting with vegetables. Jamal toddling along the accessible paths as he grew more confident in his walking dot. She thought of Zara returning for visits, bringing new ideas and growing into her own potential. Of Mrs. Okafor teaching traditional recipes in the new kitchen. Of Marcus perhaps becoming more than just the man who built their structures. Most of all, she thought of herself, not as she had been, defined by absence and loss, but as she was now. A woman who had learned to nurture life in all its forms, who had discovered that family could be cultivated as surely as any garden, and who had found, at 52, that her own life was just Beginning to bloom. In the soft glow of the nightlight, Eleanor whispered to the sleeping child who had changed everything. We made it through the frost, little one, and now we grow.